The morning sun filtered through the worn curtains of the small apartment on the east side of Nashville, casting golden stripes across the modest living room. Grace Bennett sat at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the braille letters on the page before her, while the familiar voice of Reba McEntire filled the room from an old radio perched on the counter. Fancy played softly, and Grace mouthed every word, her head swaying gently to the rhythm. At 12 years old, she had memorized every song Reba had ever recorded. Every note, every inflection. Music was her window to a world she could no longer see. "Gracie, breakfast is ready." Her father's voice cut through the melody. David Bennett placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table, his calloused hands still smelling faintly of motor oil, despite the vigorous scrubbing he'd done after his early morning shift at Morrison's Auto Repair. "Thanks, Dad," Grace said, her smile bright despite the darkness that had been her constant companion for 8 years. Her fingers found the fork with practiced ease, and she began to eat. "Did you remember what day it is?" David's weathered face softened. How could he forget? For 3 months, it was all Grace had talked about. The benefit concert at Riverside Community Center. "I got permission to leave work early. We'll be there at 5, just like you wanted." Grace's excitement was palpable. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. "Ms. Jennifer said Reba McEntire herself might actually show up this year. Can you imagine, Dad? Actually being in the same room as her?" David reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. "You know how these things work, honey. They say a lot of celebrities might come, but it doesn't always happen. I just don't want you to be disappointed." "I won't be," Grace insisted, though her voice carried a hint of the desperate hope that only a child can muster. Ms. Jennifer seemed really confident this time. She said Reba has a personal connection to the center. Jennifer Patterson ran the Music Without Boundaries program, a nonprofit initiative that provided music education to children with disabilities across Nashville. Grace had been part of the program for 2 years, and it had become the highlight of her week. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, she would spend 2 hours at the center, learning vocal techniques, practicing with other children, and most importantly, feeling normal. The accident that took Grace's mother, Linda Bennett, had happened on a rainy October evening 4 years ago. A drunk driver had run a red light, and Linda's car had been hit broadside. She died instantly. David had been at work when he got the call, and his world had shattered into pieces that he was still trying to put back together. Grace had been in the car, too, but she'd been on the opposite side. The physical injuries healed, but the trauma manifested in other ways. 6 months after the accident, Grace started experiencing vision problems. The doctors called it psychogenic blindness at first, but tests revealed that the head trauma from the accident had damaged her optic nerves. By the time she turned 8, Grace could only see shadows and vague shapes. By 9, even those were gone. David had thrown himself into being both mother and father to Grace. He worked double shifts when he could, took on extra jobs on weekends, and attended every single one of Grace's music sessions. He'd sold Linda's car, moved them from their house in the suburbs to a smaller apartment closer to his work, and learned everything he could about raising a blind child. It wasn't easy, and there were nights when he lay awake wondering if he was doing enough, if Grace would be okay, if he could give her the life she deserved. But Grace was resilient. She refused to let her blindness define her. She learned Braille quickly, mastered navigating their apartment and the route to school with her cane, and most importantly, she never stopped singing. Linda had loved music, particularly country music, and Reba McEntire had been her favorite. Grace held on to that connection like a lifeline. Every song she sang felt like a conversation with her mother. "All right, kiddo," David said, standing up and collecting the plates. "I'll pick you up from school at 4:30. Wear your blue dress, okay? The one Aunt Carol sent for your birthday. The one with the lace collar? Grace asked. That's the one. You look beautiful in it. Grace blushed. She had no idea what she looked like anymore. She remembered her mother's face, her father's smile, the color of the sky. But her own reflection was a mystery that existed only in her father's descriptions and the fading memories of her childhood. The school day dragged endlessly. Grace attended Eastwood Middle School, a public school that had a decent special education program. She had a classroom aide, Mrs. Henderson, who helped her navigate the crowded hallways and transcribed lessons that weren't available in Braille. Grace was a good student, particularly in English and history, though math proved challenging without visual aids. At lunch, she sat with her two closest friends, Maya Lawson and Tyler Reed. Maya was in a wheelchair due to cerebral palsy, and Tyler had a hearing impairment. They'd met through the Music Without Boundaries program and had bonded over their shared love of music and their frustrations with how people treated them differently. "So tonight's the big night," Maya said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Grace admitted. "What if I freeze up? What if I can't remember the words?" "You've been singing fancy in your sleep for weeks," Tyler said, his speech slightly slurred, but perfectly understandable to those who knew him. "You could sing it backwards and blindfolded." "Well, the blindfolded part I've got covered," Grace quipped, and they all laughed. "I wish I could be there," Maya said wistfully. "My mom has to work late, and my dad's out of town." "I'll record everything on my phone," Tyler promised. "You'll hear every note." The afternoon classes were a blur. Grace's mind was entirely focused on the evening ahead. Ms. Jennifer had selected 5 students to perform at the benefit concert, and Grace had been chosen to sing solo. It was both an honor and a terrifying responsibility. The event would raise money for the program, money that would determine whether it could continue operating next year. Grace wanted to do her part, wanted to prove that kids like her had value, had talent, had something to contribute. At 4:30 sharp, David's truck pulled up in front of the school. Grace heard the familiar rumble of the engine and felt Mrs. Henderson's hand guide her toward the passenger door. "Good luck tonight, Grace," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "I know you'll be wonderful." During the drive home, David chatted about his day, a transmission he'd rebuilt, a customer who'd tried to argue about the bill, the new apprentice who'd nearly dropped an engine block on his foot. Grace listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She was running through lyrics, checking her mental notes on breath control, remembering Ms. Jennifer's advice about posture and projection. At home, David helped her into the blue dress. It was soft cotton with a lace collar, and Grace ran her fingers over the delicate pattern. "How do I look, Dad?" David's voice was thick with emotion. "You look just like your mother. Beautiful." They arrived at Riverside Community Center at 5:15. The building was buzzing with activity. Grace could hear voices, laughter, the sound of chairs being arranged, someone testing a microphone. The air smelled like fresh flowers and coffee. "Grace! Over here!" Ms. Jennifer's voice called out. Grace felt her father's hand on her elbow, guiding her through the crowd. Jennifer Patterson was a petite woman in her 40s, with a warm, enthusiastic manner that put everyone at ease. "You look absolutely lovely," she said, giving Grace a gentle hug. "Now, I have some very exciting news. Reba McEntire confirmed she'll be here. She's running a bit late, but promised to be here by 6:30. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. "Really? She's really coming?" "Really and truly," Jennifer confirmed. "She's been a supporter of this program for years, though she usually donates quietly. This is the first time she's agreed to attend in person. The press is going to be here, local news, the whole thing. It's going to be wonderful for the program." Grace felt dizzy. Reba McEntire. Actually here, in the same room. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Grace practiced her song backstage with the accompanist, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Phillips who'd been playing piano since before Grace was born. Other performers rehearsed their pieces. There was Samuel Hughes, a 10-year-old boy with autism who played the violin beautifully. There was Christina Wallace, a teenager with Down syndrome who had an incredible range. There was Marcus. No, wait. There was Brian Foster, a young man with a prosthetic leg who played guitar and sang folk songs. At 6:30, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Grace heard it distinctly. She's here. Reba's here. Grace's hands went cold. This was real. This was actually happening. The concert began at 7 o'clock. The auditorium was packed with donors, families, local media, and community members. Jennifer gave an opening speech about the importance of the program, the lives it had changed, the dreams it had fostered. Then the performances began. Samuel played a haunting rendition of Canon in D. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Christina sang Over the Rainbow with such pure emotion that Grace heard sniffles throughout the room. Brian performed an original folk song about perseverance that had everyone clapping along. Then it was Grace's turn. Ms. Jennifer announced her. Our next performer is Grace Bennett. Grace is 12 years old, and she's going to sing Fancy by the legendary Reba McEntire, who we are so honored to have with us tonight. The applause was deafening. Grace felt her father squeeze her hand. "You've got this, Gracie," he whispered. Then Ms. Jennifer was guiding her onto the stage, helping her find her mark in front of the microphone. The room fell silent. Grace's heart pounded so loud, she was sure everyone could hear it. She thought of her mother. She thought of all the hours she'd practiced. She thought of why she was here, to show that blindness didn't mean voiceless, didn't mean powerless, didn't mean less than. Mr. Phillips began the introduction on the piano. The familiar chords filled the air. Grace took a deep breath and began to sing. Her voice rang out clear and strong. The nervousness melted away as she lost herself in the music. She sang about the woman born on the wrong side of the tracks, about survival, about transformation, about refusing to be defined by circumstances. Every word felt personal. Every note carried 8 years of darkness and determination. When she finished, the silence lasted just a heartbeat. Then the applause erupted like thunder. Grace could hear people cheering, whistling, shouting, "Bravo!" Her face flushed with pride and relief. But then something unexpected happened. A voice called out from the audience. A voice Grace would recognize anywhere. "Young lady, would you mind if I joined you up there?" Reba McEntire's voice. Grace froze. The audience went wild. She heard footsteps on the stage, heels clicking against the wooden floor. Then she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hi, Grace. I'm Reba. That was absolutely beautiful. Would you like to sing it again with me?" Grace couldn't speak. She managed a nod. Her whole body was trembling. "Don't be nervous, honey," Reba said softly, so only Grace could hear. "Just follow my lead and have fun. That's what music is supposed to be about." Mr. Phillips started the song again. This time, Reba and Grace sang together. Reba took the lead vocals, and Grace harmonized, their voices blending in a way that felt magical. When they reached the chorus, Reba stepped back and let Grace take over, her voice soaring with a confidence she didn't know she possessed. The audience was on their feet. Cameras flashed. People wiped tears from their eyes. David Bennett stood at the side of the stage, his face wet with tears, watching his daughter shine in a way he'd always known she could. What no one in the audience knew, what even Jennifer Patterson didn't know, was that standing at the very back of the auditorium, partially hidden behind the doorway to the lobby, was Victoria Chambers. Victoria was 52 years old, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She was one of the most powerful executives in Nashville's music industry, a talent scout and producer who had launched the careers of 3 Grammy winners and countless successful artists. She had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and almost impossibly selective. She attended hundreds of performances each year and signed perhaps 1 or 2 new artists. She hadn't planned to stay for the whole concert. She'd come as a favor to an old friend who sat on the charity's board. She'd intended to make an appearance, write a check, and leave. But when Grace Bennett had started singing, Victoria had stopped in her tracks. There was something about the girl's voice. It wasn't just technically proficient, though it was certainly that. It wasn't just emotionally resonant, though it absolutely was. There was a quality to it that Victoria had spent her entire career searching for. Authenticity. Grace wasn't performing. She was bearing her soul. She was telling a story that she understood on a fundamental level. And now, watching the girl sing with Reba McEntire, watching her hold her own next to a country music legend, Victoria felt that rare tingle of recognition. This girl had something special. Victoria pulled out her phone and made a note. Grace Bennett, 12 years old, blind, Riverside Community Center. She would need to do some research, make some calls, figure out the situation. But her instincts were rarely wrong. And right now, her instincts were screaming that this was an opportunity not to be missed. The song ended. Reba gave Grace a warm hug that Grace returned with shaking arms. "You have a gift, sweetheart," Reba told her. "Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Grace couldn't find words. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Backstage, David wrapped his daughter in his arms. "I'm so proud of you, Gracie. So proud." "Did that really just happen, Dad? Did I really sing with Reba McEntire?" "You really did, kiddo. You really did." Jennifer was beaming. "Grace, that was extraordinary. The donations are pouring in. You might have just saved this program." Local news reporters swarmed, asking for interviews. Grace answered their questions shyly, still stunned by what had happened. One reporter asked, "How does it feel to sing with your idol?" "Like a dream," Grace said honestly. "My mom loved Reba. She would have been so happy tonight. I hope she heard me, wherever she is." There wasn't a dry eye in the vicinity. As the crowd began to disperse, as David prepared to take Grace home, as the magical evening drew to a close, Victoria Chambers slipped out of the building unnoticed. But she took with her a memory of a young girl's voice, a voice that could tell stories, a voice that could move people, a voice that could, with the right guidance, the right opportunities, change the music industry. Grace Bennett had no idea that her life was about to transform in ways she couldn't imagine. All she knew as she climbed into her father's truck, exhausted and exhilarated, was that she'd done something impossible. She'd sung with Reba McEntire. She'd made her father proud. She'd honored her mother's memory. And somehow, in a world of darkness, she'd found a way to shine. The next 3 days passed in a blur of excitement and disbelief. The local news had aired the footage of Grace singing with Reba McEntire. And suddenly, everyone at Eastwood Middle School knew who Grace Bennett was. Students who'd never spoken to her before stopped her in the hallways to congratulate her. Teachers mentioned her performance in class. Even Principal Morgan made a special announcement during morning assembly about how proud the school was of Grace's accomplishment. "You're famous," Maya said during lunch on Monday, scrolling through her phone. The video has over 50,000 views already. People are sharing it everywhere. Grace felt overwhelmed by it all. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. At Music Without Boundaries, she was just one of many kids. At school, she'd always been the blind girl who needed special accommodations. Now, suddenly, she was that amazing singer who performed with Reba McEntire. "Read me some of the comments," Grace asked Tyler. Tyler scrolled through. "Okay, here's one. This girl is incredible. What a voice." Here's another. "She brought tears to my eyes. So much talent and courage." Oh, and this one. "Reba clearly recognized real talent. This young lady has a bright future." Grace blushed. "They're just being nice. They're being honest," Maya corrected. "Grace, you need to accept that you're really, really good." But Grace couldn't quite believe it. She'd been singing for years, mostly for herself, for her mother's memory, for the joy of it. The idea that strangers across the internet were listening to her voice felt surreal. David was experiencing his own form of whiplash. At Morrison's Auto Repair, his co-workers kept congratulating him. His boss, Robert Morrison, a gruff man who rarely showed emotion, had actually clapped him on the back and said, "That's some daughter you've got there, Bennett. You should be proud." On Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after the concert, David was under a Ford pickup replacing brake pads when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was covered in grease and focused on his work. But something made him wipe his hands on a rag and check the screen. Unknown number. Nashville area code. "Hello?" he answered, wedging the phone between his shoulder and ear. "Is this David Bennett? Grace Bennett's father?" The voice was professional, female, with a hint of Southern accent. "Yes, that's me. Who's calling?" "My name is Victoria Chambers. I'm a music producer and talent executive here in Nashville. I attended the benefit concert on Friday, and I was deeply impressed by your daughter's performance." David's heart skipped. "Oh, well, thank you. Grace worked really hard on that." "I'm sure she did. Mr. Bennett, I'd like to discuss some opportunities with you and Grace. Would you be available to meet with me sometime this week? I'd like to talk about Grace's future in music." David's mind raced. He knew enough about Nashville to know that music producers didn't just call out of the blue. This could be a scam, or it could be legitimate. What kind of opportunities are we talking about? "I prefer to discuss details in person," Victoria said smoothly. "But I can tell you that I've been in this industry for 25 years, and I've worked with some very successful artists. I believe Grace has exceptional potential, and I'd like to explore how I might be able to help develop her talent." "I'll need to think about it," David said cautiously. "And talk to Grace." "Of course. I completely understand. I'll have my assistant email you some information about my company and my credentials. Take your time, do your research. If you're interested, we can set up a meeting at your convenience. There's no pressure, Mr. Bennett. I simply think your daughter is extraordinarily talented, and I'd hate to see that talent go unrecognized." After the call ended, David stood in the garage, phone in his greasy hand, trying to process what had just happened. A music producer wanted to meet with Grace. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to mechanics from East Nashville whose daughters sang at community centers. That evening, after Grace finished her homework, David broached the subject carefully. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and he'd made spaghetti, Grace's favorite comfort food. "Gracie, I got an interesting phone call today," he began. "A woman named Victoria Chambers contacted me. She's a music producer. She was at your concert on Friday." Grace set down her fork. "A music producer? What did she want?" "She wants to meet with us. She said she thinks you're very talented, and she might be able to help with your music career." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Do you think it's real?" Or is it some kind of scam? That's what I want to find out. She's sending information about her company. We can research her, maybe talk to Ms. Jennifer about it. If it seems legitimate, we can meet with her and see what she has to say. But Gracie, I need you to know something important. Nothing is going to happen that you don't want to happen. This is your life, your talent, your decision. I'm just here to support you. What do you think, Dad? Should we meet with her? David chose his words carefully. I think it doesn't hurt to listen. But I also think we need to be very careful. The music industry can be tough, especially on young people. If this woman is legitimate and she's offering something good, that's wonderful. But we're not going to let anyone take advantage of you or push you into something you're not ready for. Grace nodded slowly. I'd like to at least hear what she has to say. Is that okay? That's absolutely okay. The next day, David received an email from Victoria's office. It included her professional biography, a list of artists she'd worked with, links to her company's website, and testimonials from several well-known musicians. David spent his lunch break researching her. Everything checked out. Victoria Chambers was indeed a highly respected figure in Nashville's music scene. She'd discovered Katie Morrison, a rising country star who'd been nominated for a Grammy last year. She'd produced albums for established artists. She sat on the board of several music charities. David called Jennifer Patterson to get her opinion. Victoria Chambers? Jennifer said, her voice filled with surprise. David, she's one of the most influential people in Nashville music. If she's interested in Grace, this could be life-changing. But you're right to be cautious. Let me make some calls. Talk to people who've worked with her. 2 days later, Jennifer called back. I spoke to 3 different people who've worked with Victoria. They all said the same thing. She's demanding, she has incredibly high standards, but she's also ethical and genuinely cares about her artists. She doesn't sign just anyone. She's very selective. If she's interested in Grace, it means she sees something really special. With that endorsement, David agreed to a meeting. Victoria's assistant scheduled it for the following Tuesday at Victoria's office in the heart of downtown Nashville. The office was in a modern building with glass walls and sleek furnishings. David and Grace arrived 15 minutes early, both nervous. David wore his only suit, slightly outdated but clean and pressed. Grace wore her blue dress again, her hair neatly braided, her hands clutching her cane. A receptionist greeted them warmly and offered them water. They waited in a lobby decorated with gold and platinum records, awards, and framed photographs of Victoria with various celebrities. At precisely 2 o'clock, Victoria Chambers emerged from her office. She was exactly as her professional photos suggested. Polished, confident, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. David, Grace, thank you so much for coming, she said, shaking David's hand and then gently taking Grace's. Please, come in. Her office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Nashville. A large desk dominated one side of the room, and comfortable couches were arranged in a seating area on the other side. Victoria gestured for them to sit on the couches while she took a chair across from them. Grace, I want to start by telling you directly. Your performance at that benefit concert was one of the most remarkable things I've seen in 25 years in this business, Victoria began. You have a rare gift. Your technical skills are impressive. But more importantly, you have the ability to connect emotionally with your audience. That's something that can't be taught. Grace blushed. Thank you, ma'am. I've been thinking all week about how I might be able to help you develop your talent. Let me be clear about something up front. I don't work with many young artists. The music industry can be brutal, and I believe children need to be protected from certain aspects of it. However, I do make exceptions for truly exceptional talent when I believe I can provide the right support and guidance. What exactly are you proposing? David asked, his protective instincts on high alert. I'd like to work with Grace on developing her vocal skills, her performance abilities, and her understanding of the music business. This would involve weekly coaching sessions with some of the best vocal instructors in Nashville. I'd also want her to start working on original material. Not immediately, but eventually. I'd arrange for her to have access to a recording studio where she can practice and, when she's ready, record demos. And what would you get out of this? David asked bluntly. Victoria smiled, apparently appreciating his directness. If Grace continues to develop as I believe she will, I would eventually like to sign her to my label and manage her career. But that's down the road. Right now, I'm proposing an investment in her future, with no strings attached. A 6-month trial period where we work together, see if it's a good fit for everyone. If at any point you or Grace decide this isn't working, you're free to walk away. No contracts, no obligations. Why would you do that? David asked skeptically. Because I've learned that the best artists are the ones who choose this path freely, not the ones who are pressured or manipulated into it. I want Grace to have time to develop, to learn, to decide if this is really what she wants. And I want you to have time to see that I'm someone you can trust with your daughter's future. Grace spoke up. What about school? And my program at Riverside? School comes first, always, Victoria said firmly. I would never ask you to compromise your education. As for Music Without Boundaries, I think what Jennifer does is wonderful, and I'd encourage you to continue participating. My coaching would supplement what you're already doing, not replace it. What about the fact that Grace is blind? David asked. Is that going to be an issue? Victoria met his eyes steadily. It's going to be a factor, certainly. There are practical considerations in terms of performance and recording. But is it a problem? Absolutely not. Some of the greatest musicians in history have been blind. Stevie Wonder, Ray Charles, Andrea Bocelli. They didn't let vision impairment stop them. Grace will need some accommodations, but I've worked with artists with various disabilities before. We'll figure it out together. They talked for another hour. Victoria outlined what the training would involve. Twice-weekly sessions with a vocal coach named Michael Rivers, monthly meetings with Victoria herself to discuss progress and goals, and access to a practice studio whenever Grace wanted it. She also mentioned that she'd like Grace to perform at some small, low-pressure venues to gain experience. I want to be very clear about something, Victoria said as the meeting wound down. This is going to be hard work. I have high standards, and I'll expect Grace to meet them. There will be days when she's frustrated, when she wants to quit, when it feels like too much. But I also promise that I will never push her beyond what's healthy or appropriate for a 12-year-old girl. Her well-being comes first. David looked at Grace. What do you think, kiddo? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Can I ask you something, Ms. Chambers? Of course. Why me? There are lots of talented singers in Nashville. Why are you interested in helping me specifically? Victoria leaned forward. That's an excellent question, and you deserve an honest answer. I heard something in your voice that I don't hear often. Truth. You weren't trying to sound like anyone else. You weren't performing for applause. You were singing because you needed to, because the music was part of you. That authenticity is incredibly rare, and it's the foundation of a truly great artist. I believe you could become one of those artists, Grace, but only if you want it badly enough to work for it. Grace took a deep breath. I'd like to try, if it's okay with my dad. David felt a mix of pride and terror. He wanted to protect his daughter from disappointment, from exploitation, from the harsh realities of an industry he didn't understand. But he also wanted to give her every opportunity to pursue her dreams. 6 months, he said to Victoria. We'll try this for 6 months. But the moment I think it's not good for Grace, we're done. Agreed? Agreed, Victoria said, extending her hand. They shook on it. The next week, Grace had her first session with Michael Rivers. Michael was a man in his 60s, with a gentle manner and an impressive resume. He'd been a professional opera singer before retiring to teach, and he'd worked with everyone from Broadway stars to country legends. The studio was in a converted house in the Germantown neighborhood. It was warm and welcoming, filled with instruments and comfortable furniture. Michael greeted Grace and David at the door. "You must be Grace," he said warmly. "I've watched your video about 24 times. You have a lovely instrument." "Thank you," Grace said shyly. "David, there's a coffee shop 2 doors down if you'd like to wait there," Michael suggested. "Or you're welcome to stay." David looked at Grace. "What would you prefer, Gracie?" "I think I'd like to try it on my own," Grace said. "Is that okay?" David hugged her. "I'll be right down the street. Call me when you're done." For the next 90 minutes, Michael worked with Grace. He started by just talking to her, learning about her musical background, what she liked to sing, what challenged her. Then he had her sing a simple scale so he could assess her range and identify areas that needed work. "You have a beautiful natural tone," Michael told her. "Your pitch is excellent, and your breath control is quite good for someone with no formal training. What we're going to work on is expanding your range, strengthening your diaphragm support, and giving you more tools for emotional expression." They worked through various exercises. Michael explained everything in detail, never assuming Grace could simply watch and imitate. He described the physical mechanics of singing, how the diaphragm worked, how to position the soft palate, how to relax the jaw. He was patient when Grace didn't understand something, finding different ways to explain until it clicked. "Let's try something," Michael said toward the end of the session. "I want you to sing the first verse of Fancy again. But this time, I want you to imagine you're telling the story to someone you love. Not performing for an audience, just sharing a story that matters to you." Grace sang, and this time, without the pressure of performance, something different emerged. The emotion was even more raw, more immediate. "Beautiful," Michael said quietly when she finished. "That's what we're aiming for. That connection between the story and your heart and your voice. That's where the magic lives." When David picked her up, Grace was glowing. "Dad, it was amazing. Michael is so nice. And I learned so much. Did you know there are muscles in your face that affect how you sing? And different ways to breathe depending on the type of song?" David smiled, relief flooding through him. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe Victoria Chambers was exactly who she seemed to be. Someone who genuinely wanted to help. Over the next few weeks, Grace fell into a new routine. School during the day, homework in the evenings, music without boundaries on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sessions with Michael on Mondays and Wednesdays. It was exhausting, but Grace loved every minute of it. Victoria checked in regularly, sometimes sitting in on sessions with Michael, other times meeting with Grace and David for coffee to discuss how things were progressing. She was demanding. She expected Grace to practice daily, to complete vocal exercises, to push herself, but she was never unkind. "You're improving significantly," Victoria told Grace after the first month. "Michael says you're one of the most dedicated students he's ever had. That work ethic is going to serve you well." But challenges emerged too. Some kids at school started treating Grace differently, not with admiration, but with jealousy or suspicion. A girl named Ashley Cooper, who'd been in Grace's English class for 2 years, started making snide comments. Must be nice getting special treatment just because you're blind, Ashley said one day in the cafeteria, loud enough for Grace to hear. Grace felt her face burn. Maya immediately jumped to her defense. That's not fair, Ashley. Grace works harder than anyone. Sure she does, Ashley sneered. Or maybe people just feel sorry for her. Tyler stood up. You need to back off. The confrontation ended when a teacher intervened, but the damage was done. Grace spent the rest of the day feeling sick to her stomach, wondering if Ashley was right. Was her talent real? Or did people just pity her? That night, she cried in her father's arms. What if I'm not actually good? What if everyone is just being nice because they feel bad for me? David held her tight. Gracie, listen to me. Victoria Chambers doesn't make business decisions based on pity. Michael Rivers doesn't waste his time on students he doesn't believe in. Those people at the concert didn't cry because they felt sorry for you. They cried because you moved them. Your talent is real. Some people are going to be jealous or mean, and that's their problem, not yours. But what if? No what ifs, David said firmly. You're going to face criticism and doubt for the rest of your life if you pursue this career. It's part of the territory. The question is, do you believe in yourself? Grace thought about it, about the feeling she got when she sang, about how music made her feel connected to something larger than herself, about her mother's memory and Reba's encouragement and the joy on her father's face when she performed. Yes, she said quietly, I believe in myself. Then, that's all that matters. 2 months into the training, Victoria had news. There's a small venue in East Nashville called the Blue Note Cafe. It's very low-key, mostly singer-songwriters performing for intimate crowds. The owner is a friend of mine. I'd like you to perform there, Grace. Just 3 songs, nothing fancy, no pressure. Grace felt her stomach drop. Perform? In front of strangers? In front of about 40 people, Victoria corrected. It's time for you to get used to performing in different environments. The benefit concert was wonderful, but that was a supportive audience who came specifically to see kids from the program. At the Blue Note, you'll be singing for people who don't know you, who have no expectations. It's good practice. Grace wanted to say no. The thought terrified her. But she also knew Victoria was right. If she was serious about this, she needed to perform. Okay, she agreed, her voice shaking. When? 3 weeks from Saturday. That gives you time to prepare. The next 3 weeks were intense. Michael helped her select 3 songs. Fancy, of course, but also The Climb by Miley Cyrus and Stand By Me, a classic that Michael thought would showcase Grace's voice beautifully. They rehearsed until Grace could sing them in her sleep. David took time off work to come to the performance. Maya and Tyler and their families would be there too. Jennifer Patterson planned to attend. Even Michael said he'd come to support her. The night of the performance arrived. The Blue Note Cafe was exactly as Victoria had described. Small, intimate, with mismatched furniture and a tiny stage. Grace could smell coffee and pastries. She could hear the murmur of conversation, the clink of cups. You're going to do great, Victoria told her backstage. Remember everything Michael taught you. Connect with the emotion of the songs. And most importantly, enjoy yourself. Grace's name was called. She walked onto the stage, her cane guiding her, and took her place at the microphone. The room quieted. Hi, she said, her voice barely audible. My name is Grace Bennett, and I'm going to sing 3 songs for you tonight. She started with Stand By Me. Her voice shook on the first few notes, but then she found her footing. She thought of her father, of how he'd stood by her through everything. She thought of her mother, who she hoped was watching. The emotion steadied her. and her voice grew stronger. By the time she finished, the room was completely silent. Then applause broke out, warm and genuine. The next two songs went even better. By Fancy, Grace was in her element, the nerves replaced by the joy of performing. When she finished, the applause was thunderous for such a small venue. Afterward, several audience members approached her to tell her how much they'd enjoyed the performance. One woman said, "You made me cry. Thank you for that." A man asked if she had any recordings he could buy. David was beaming. "You were incredible, Gracie. I'm so proud of you." Victoria pulled David aside. "I think it's time to start talking seriously about Grace's future. She's ready for more than practice sessions. She's ready to start building a real career." David felt the weight of that statement. This wasn't just a fun hobby anymore. This was becoming real, becoming something that could define his daughter's life. "Let's talk about it," he said. And just like that, Grace Bennett's journey from a girl who sang in her apartment to a young artist with genuine potential took another leap forward. Spring arrived in Nashville with its usual unpredictable temperament. Warm sunshine one day, torrential rain the next. For Grace, the changing season mirrored the transformation happening in her life. 4 months had passed since Victoria Chambers had first reached out, and in that time, Grace had grown not just as a singer, but as a person. The sessions with Michael continued, but they'd evolved. They were no longer just technical exercises, but collaborative, creative sessions. Michael introduced Grace to songwriting, teaching her about structure, melody, and lyrical storytelling. "You need to find your own voice, not just vocally, but artistically," Michael explained during one session. "What stories do you want to tell? What matters to you?" It was a question Grace had never really considered. She'd always sung other people's songs, other people's stories. The idea of creating her own felt both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know if I have anything important to say," Grace admitted. "Everyone has something important to say," Michael countered. "The question is whether you're brave enough to say it." At Victoria's suggestion, Grace started keeping a journal, a braille journal where she could write down thoughts, feelings, observations. At first, the entries were simple. What she did that day, how a session went, things she was grateful for. But gradually, they deepened. She wrote about missing her mother. She wrote about the frustration of blindness, the way people sometimes talked past her as if she wasn't there. She wrote about her fears and hopes and dreams. "This is the raw material of songwriting," Victoria told her during one of their monthly meetings. "Your authentic experiences, your real emotions. That's what connects with people." Meanwhile, David was grappling with his own challenges. Grace's training and activities were eating up more and more time, and his work schedule wasn't flexible enough to accommodate it all. He'd already used up most of his vacation days, and his boss, while supportive, couldn't keep giving him time off without consequences. One evening in April, David sat down with Grace to have a difficult conversation. "Gracie, we need to talk about some practical things," he began. "The schedule we're keeping right now isn't sustainable. I can't keep leaving work early for all your sessions and performances. We might need to make some changes." Grace's face fell. "You mean I have to stop?" "No, not stop, but maybe reduce. Or find a different way to manage things." Before Grace could respond, David's phone rang. It was Victoria. "David, I'm glad I caught you. I wanted to discuss something. I've been thinking about the challenges you're facing with Grace's schedule. What if I could help? I have a driver, Charles, who's worked for me for 10 years. He's got a daughter around Grace's age, and he's one of the most trustworthy people I know. He could handle transportation to and from sessions, performances, any music-related activities. That would free you up to maintain your work schedule." David hesitated. The offer was generous, but accepting it meant trusting someone else with his daughter's safety. "I don't know, Victoria. I understand your hesitation. What if you meet Charles first? Spend some time with him. Make sure you're comfortable. If you're not, we'll figure out something else." "But David, I don't want logistical challenges to hold Grace back from her potential." After meeting Charles Baker, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with a warm smile and impeccable references, David agreed to the arrangement. Charles would pick Grace up from school, take her to sessions, and bring her home afterward. David would still attend all performances, but the day-to-day transportation pressure would be lifted. It helped, but David still felt guilty. He was missing parts of his daughter's life. He wasn't in the studio hearing her improve. He wasn't there for the small victories and frustrations. He was at work, covered in grease, fixing other people's cars while someone else drove his daughter to pursue her dreams. Grace sensed her father's struggle. One night, she climbed into his lap like she used to when she was younger. "Dad, I know this is hard on you," she said quietly. "If it's too much, I can stop. I don't want you to be stressed because of me." David hugged her tight. "Gracie, you're not stressing me. I'm just trying to figure out how to be the dad you need, while also keeping a roof over our heads. But I want you to know something. I believe in you. I believe in what you're doing. And I'm going to figure this out. Okay?" "Okay," Grace whispered. At school, things remained complicated. While most students were supportive or indifferent, a small group led by Ashley Cooper continued to make Grace's life difficult. The comments were subtle enough that teachers didn't catch them, but pointed enough to hurt. "Must be nice having people chauffeur you around," Ashley said one day as Grace waited for Charles. "Do you even write your own songs? Or does someone else do that for you?" she asked another time. Tyler and Maya tried to shield Grace from the worst of it, but they couldn't be everywhere. Grace tried to follow her father's advice and not let it bother her, but the constant needling wore her down. The situation came to a head in late April. Grace was in the bathroom when she heard Ashley and two other girls come in. "I heard her dad is just a mechanic," one of the girls said. "How can they even afford this whole music thing?" "They probably can't," Ashley replied. "I bet that Victoria woman is paying for everything. She probably feels sorry for the poor blind girl." "That's so fake," another girl chimed in. "I mean, Grace's voice is okay, but it's not like she's actually special or anything." Grace stood frozen in the stall, tears streaming down her face. She waited until they left before emerging. She splashed water on her face, trying to compose herself, but the damage was done. That night, she told her father what had happened. David was furious. "That's bullying, Gracie. We need to report it to the school." "No," Grace said firmly. "That'll just make it worse. They'll say I'm getting more special treatment." "Then what do you want to do?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I want to prove them wrong. I want to be so good that no one can say I'm only getting opportunities because people pity me." David looked at his daughter, seeing the determination in her face, and felt a swell of pride mixed with concern. Grace was growing up, toughening up, but he worried about the cost of that armor she was building around her heart. In May, Victoria presented a new opportunity. There's a youth music competition called Nashville Rising. It's for amateur singers 18 and under. The winner gets a recording contract with a small label, some studio time, and mentorship from industry professionals. "I think you should enter, Grace." Grace's immediate reaction was panic. A competition? Against other singers? Against about 50 other singers in the preliminary rounds. Then it narrows down from there. The final round will be televised locally. It's a significant opportunity, Grace. The exposure alone would be valuable. "What if I lose?" Victoria leaned forward. "Then you lose. But you'll have gained experience, exposure, and resilience. Grace, you can't be afraid of failure. Every successful artist has lost competitions, been rejected by labels, had performances that didn't go well. It's part of the process. Grace talked it over with her father and with Michael. Both encouraged her to try. "You're ready for this," Michael assured her. "Your technical skills have improved dramatically. Your emotional expression is powerful. And you've been performing regularly at the Blue Note. You can handle this." Grace registered for Nashville Rising. The preliminary round was in 3 weeks. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Grace worked with Michael to select the perfect song for the 2-minute preliminary audition. They settled on Rise Up by Andra Day, a powerful anthem about perseverance that felt deeply personal to Grace. She practiced constantly, at home, at the studio, even walking between classes at school. The lyrics became part of her. "And I'll rise up, rise like the day, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache." The preliminary auditions were held at a theater in downtown Nashville. When Grace and David arrived, the lobby was packed with young singers and their families. Grace could hear snatches of vocal warm-ups, nervous chatter, the buzz of anticipation. "There must be 60 or 70 people here," David said quietly. "You okay, Gracie?" Grace nodded, though her hands were shaking. "I'm okay." They checked in at the registration desk. Grace was assigned number 43. They'd be here for hours. As they waited, Grace overheard other singers talking. One girl, who sounded around 16, was discussing her professional vocal coach and the 3 years she'd spent training in Los Angeles. Another boy mentioned that his father was a session musician who'd worked with major artists. Grace suddenly felt very small. She'd been training seriously for only 4 months. She was 12 years old. She was blind. What was she doing here, competing against people who dedicated their entire lives to this? David must have sensed her spiraling thoughts. He put his arm around her. "Hey, remember what Victoria said? This is about experience and exposure. Whatever happens, you're going to walk out of here having learned something. That's what matters." Finally, after nearly 3 hours of waiting, Grace's number was called. An assistant led her backstage. She could hear the murmur of judges' voices from beyond the curtain. "Just stand on the marked spot," the assistant instructed. "When you hear the buzzer, introduce yourself and then sing. You have 2 minutes maximum. Good luck." Grace stood on her mark, gripping her cane. The buzzer sounded. "Hi, I'm Grace Bennett. I'm 12 years old, and I'm going to sing Rise Up." The backing track started. Grace took a breath and began to sing. She poured everything into it. All the frustration from Ashley's bullying, all the fear that she wasn't good enough, all the determination to prove herself, all the love she had for music and for her mother's memory. Her voice soared, filling the theater with raw emotion. When she finished, there was silence. Grace's heart sank. Then she heard a voice from the judges' table. "That was extraordinary. Thank you, Grace." 2 weeks later, she received the call. She'd made it through to the semifinals. She was one of 20 singers who would perform in front of a live audience and a panel of industry judges. The semifinals would be in June. The news sent ripples through Grace's life. The school newspaper did an article about her. Local news picked up the story. Blind 12-year-old to compete in Nashville Rising. Suddenly, people who'd never heard of Grace Bennett were learning her name. At Music Without Boundaries, Jennifer was thrilled. "Grace, this is wonderful. You're representing not just yourself, but every kid in this program. You're showing what's possible." But with the increased attention came increased pressure. Grace felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She wasn't just singing for herself anymore. She was representing blind kids, kids with disabilities, her program, her school, her father. The nightmares started in late May. Grace would dream that she was on stage and forgot the words, or that she opened her mouth and no sound came out, or that the audience was laughing at her. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. David noticed the change in his daughter. She was quieter, more withdrawn. She picked at her food. The joy that had characterized her training was being replaced by anxiety. One evening, he called Victoria. "Grace is struggling," he told her. "The pressure is getting to her. I'm worried this competition might be too much." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Bring her to my office tomorrow. I think we need to have a conversation, the three of us." The next day, they sat in Victoria's office. Grace looked small and exhausted. "Grace, your father tells me you're having a hard time," Victoria began gently. "Talk to me about what's going on." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "What if I fail? What if I get on that stage and mess up? Everyone is watching now. Everyone has expectations. What if I let everyone down?" Victoria moved to sit beside Grace on the couch. "Can I tell you a story? When I was 25 years old, I produced my first album for a singer I'd discovered. I was absolutely convinced she was going to be a superstar. I invested everything I had, money, time, reputation, into that album. It flopped. Completely. The singer decided to quit music entirely. I felt like a failure. I thought my career was over before it really started." "What did you do?" Grace asked. "I cried for about a week. Then I got up and tried again. And I failed again. And then I tried again." "Grace, do you know how many artists I've worked with over 25 years? "Oh, just..." Grace shook her head. "Hundreds." "Do you know how many became successful?" "I don't know." "About 15. That means I've failed far more than I've succeeded. But those 15 successes, they were worth all the failures. And more importantly, each failure taught me something that made the next attempt better." Grace was quiet, processing this. "Here's what I want you to understand," Victoria continued. "Your worth as a person, as an artist, as a human being, is not determined by whether you win this competition. If you go out there and sing your heart out and you don't make it to the finals, you haven't failed. You've tried something difficult and brave. That alone is success. But what about everyone who's supporting me? What about Dad who's working so hard? What about the program? What if I let them down?" David knelt in front of his daughter. "Gracie, listen to me. I am already proud of you. Not because you might win a competition, but because of who you are. Because you work hard. Because you're kind. Because you get up every day and face a world that's harder for you than it is for most people. And you do it with grace and courage. That's what makes me proud. Everything else is just extra." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I'm just so scared." "I know," David said, pulling her into a hug. "Being scared means you care. But don't let the fear steal the joy. You love singing. Remember that. That's why you're doing this." Victoria gave them some time, then added, "Grace, I want you to think about something. What would you tell another kid in your position? If one of your friends from Music Without Boundaries was competing and felt this scared, what would you say to them?" Grace thought about it. I'd tell them that they should just do their best. That winning isn't everything. That they should enjoy the experience and be proud they had the courage to try." "Exactly," Victoria said. "Now, why don't you take your own advice?" The conversation helped. Grace still felt nervous about the competition, but the paralyzing fear loosened its grip. She refocused on the music itself, on the joy of singing, on the story she wanted to tell. The semifinals of Nashville Rising took place on a Saturday evening in mid-June at the Ryman Auditorium. the legendary venue known as the Mother Church of Country Music. The 20 semi-finalists would each perform one song. The judges would select 10 finalists who would compete in the final round 2 weeks later. The Ryman was overwhelming. Grace could feel the history in the old wooden pews, could sense the vastness of the space. When she stepped onto the stage for the sound check, her voice echoed back to her in a way that gave her chills. This stage has hosted everyone from Hank Williams to Taylor Swift, the stage manager told her. You're in good company. The weight of that history should have been intimidating, but instead, Grace found it comforting. All those artists had stood where she was standing. They'd been nervous, too. They'd wondered if they were good enough, and they'd sung anyway. The audience arrived. The theater held 2,362 people, and it was nearly full. Maya and Tyler were there with their families. Jennifer had brought a group from Music Without Boundaries. David sat in the front row, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Victoria sat a few rows back, her face calm and confident. Backstage, Grace waited with the other 19 semi-finalists. Some were friendly, introducing themselves and wishing her luck. Others were quiet, focused, sizing up the competition. One girl, a 15-year-old named Rebecca Hayes, with a powerful voice and professional demeanor, seemed particularly aloof. I've been training for this for 3 years, Rebecca told another contestant within Grace's hearing. I didn't come all this way to lose to some novelty act. Grace knew the comment was directed at her. The novelty act, the blind girl who'd gotten lucky. She felt anger flash through her, hot and sharp. Good. Anger was better than fear. The show began. One by one, the semi-finalists took the stage. The talent level was incredibly high. There were singers with operatic training, country artists who'd been performing since they were toddlers, pop singers with professional stage presence. Grace listened to each one, her nervousness mounting. She was scheduled to perform 17th. As the 16th singer, Rebecca Hayes, took the stage and delivered a flawless, technically perfect rendition of a Whitney Houston song, Grace felt her confidence waver. How could she compete with that level of polish and professionalism? Then it was her turn. Charles guided her to the wings. You've got this, Grace, he said quietly. Remember why you started singing in the first place. Grace walked onto the stage. The applause was warm, encouraging. She found her mark at the microphone. Hi, I'm Grace Bennett, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm going to sing an original song tonight. There was a murmur in the audience. An original song was a risk. Most contestants had chosen well-known pieces that showcased their vocal abilities. But Grace and Michael had been working on this song for weeks, and Victoria had agreed it was the right choice. The song was called Through the Dark, and it was about Grace's journey from the accident that took her mother and her sight to finding her way forward through music. Michael had helped her with the melody and structure, but the lyrics were all Grace. The music started. A simple piano accompaniment that Michael himself was playing from the orchestra pit. Grace began to sing. I don't remember when the light went out. Don't recall the moment darkness won, but I remember Mama's voice somehow, singing to me like the rising sun. Her voice filled the massive theater, clear and achingly vulnerable. She sang about loss and fear, and the feeling of being lost in a world she couldn't see. She sang about finding music, about how it became her light, her language, her way of making sense of everything. Through the dark, I found my way. Through the dark, I learned to see. What my eyes can't show me now lives in every melody. Through the dark, I found my voice. Through the dark, I found me. There wasn't a sound in the theater. 2,000 people held their breath, held in the spell of a 12-year-old girl singing her truth. When the final note faded, the silence lasted for what felt like an eternity. Then the audience erupted. People rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. Grace heard someone shout, "Bravo!" She heard crying. She heard her father's voice above it all. "That's my girl!" Backstage, the other contestants looked at her differently. Even Rebecca Hayes approached her. That was really beautiful," she said, and she sounded sincere. The remaining 3 performers went on, but Grace barely registered them. She was still floating, still processing what had just happened. She'd sung her story, her truth, and people had heard it. Really heard it. When all 20 performances were complete, the judges deliberated for 30 minutes. Then they called all the semi-finalists back onto the stage. Judge Amanda Morrison, a Grammy-winning country artist, spoke into the microphone. "We've seen incredible talent tonight. Choosing only 10 of you to move forward was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. But we have our finalists." She read the names one by one. Each name was followed by cheers from the audience. Grace held her breath. And our final finalist, Grace Bennett. Grace's knees almost buckled. She'd made it. She was going to the finals. The 2 weeks between the semifinals and the finals of Nashville Rising were unlike anything Grace had ever experienced. The local news coverage from the semifinals had gone viral. The video of Grace performing Through the Dark was shared thousands of times on social media. Comments poured in from across the country. "This girl is going to be a star," one person wrote. "I've never been so moved by a performance," another commented. "She's the real deal," said a third. But for every 10 positive comments, there was one negative. "She's only getting attention because she's blind." The sob story is manipulative. Her voice is good, but not that special. Grace tried not to read the comments, but it was impossible to avoid them entirely. Tyler showed her the positive ones, trying to shield her from the negativity, but Grace knew it was there. The attention brought opportunities. A local radio station wanted to interview Grace. A regional magazine requested a feature story. 2 independent labels reached out to Victoria expressing interest. Even some national media outlets were starting to pay attention. "This is exactly what I hoped would happen," Victoria told Grace and David during a meeting. "Regardless of what happens in the finals, Grace has already achieved something significant. People know her name now. They know her story. That's invaluable." But the pressure was intense. Grace was no longer just another contestant. She was the favorite. The human interest story, the girl everyone was rooting for. And with that came expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. The finals would be televised live on a local Nashville network with streaming available nationally. Each of the 10 finalists would perform 2 songs, one chosen by the judges and one of their own selection. The judges' choice for Grace was The Story by Brandi Carlile. A beautiful, emotionally complex song that would challenge her technically and interpretively. Grace threw herself into preparation. She worked with Michael for hours each day, refining every phrase, every breath, every emotional beat. She practiced Through the Dark again and again, making sure it would be even stronger than her semi-final performance. But the stress was taking its toll. Grace wasn't sleeping well. She lost weight. She snapped at her father over small things, then felt terrible about it. The joy that had always characterized her relationship with music was being overshadowed by anxiety and pressure. One afternoon, a week before the finals, Grace had a breakdown in the studio. She was working on the story, and she couldn't get a particular phrase right. After the 10th failed attempt, she suddenly screamed in frustration and threw her Braille lyric sheets across the room. "I can't do this!" she shouted. "It's too hard! I'm not good enough!" Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said gently, "Grace, we need to take a break. Come sit with me." They sat on the studio couch. Michael handed Grace a glass of water. "Talk to me," he said. "What's really going on?" Grace's composure crumbled. "Everyone is expecting me to win. The kids at my program, my dad, Victoria, everyone who's been supporting me. And I don't know if I can. What if I let them all down? What if I worked this hard and I'm still not good enough?" "Grace, do you remember the first time you came to this studio? What we talked about? You said I had a beautiful instrument." "I said that, yes. But I also said something else. I said that the magic lives in the connection between the story and your heart and your voice. Do you remember that?" Grace nodded. "That connection has gotten lost," Michael said gently. "You're so focused on technique, on being perfect, on meeting everyone's expectations, that you've forgotten why you sing. You're not singing to win a competition, Grace. You're singing to tell stories that matter. You're singing because music is how you make sense of the world. You're singing because it's who you are. But the competition is just a platform. It's not the point. The point is the music. The point is the truth you bring to it. If you go into that final trying to win, you'll be tense, you'll be in your head, and you won't give your best performance. But if you go in trying to tell two stories that matter, one that Brandi Carlile wrote and one that you wrote, and you commit to those stories with everything you have, then regardless of the outcome, you'll have succeeded." Grace let those words sink in. "How do I stop caring about winning?" Michael smiled. "You don't. You're human, and you're 12 years old. Of course you care about winning, but you make winning secondary to the music. You walk on that stage and you think, my job is to tell these stories as truthfully as I can. Whatever happens after that is out of my control." That evening, Grace talked to her father about her fears. "Dad, what if I don't win?" David was washing dishes, and he paused, his hands in the soapy water. "Then you don't win. And the sun will still rise the next day. And you'll still be my daughter. And I'll still be proud of you. And you'll have gained experience that will help you in the future. But all the opportunities that might come from winning will come anyway if you're meant to have them. Grace, Victoria told me something when we first met with her. She said she doesn't believe in forcing opportunities. She believes that genuine talent, combined with hard work and persistence, will create its own opportunities. You have genuine talent. You work harder than anyone I know. The opportunities will come." Grace wanted to believe him, but doubt was a persistent shadow. The night before the finals, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing through lyrics, through melodies, through all the things that could go wrong. Around midnight, she got up and went to the living room. She heard her father's snoring from his bedroom. He'd been working overtime to make up for all the time he'd taken off for Grace's music activities, and he was exhausted. Grace sat at the kitchen table and ran her fingers over her Braille journal. She opened it to a blank page and began to write. She wrote about her fear. She wrote about her mother and how she wished Linda could be there tomorrow. She wrote about her father and how much she loved him and how scared she was of disappointing him. She wrote about music and what it meant to her and why she'd started this journey in the first place. As she wrote, something shifted. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it became more manageable. She wasn't alone in this. She had people who loved her regardless of outcomes. She had music, which had been her companion through the darkest times. She had her own voice and her own story, and those things had value whether she won a competition or not. She went back to bed and finally slept. The day of the finals arrived with bright sunshine, and unseasonably warm temperatures. Grace woke early and went through her vocal warm-ups. She ate a light breakfast. Michael had warned her about performing on a full stomach. She took a shower and let her father help her into the dress Victoria had bought for her. A simple but elegant navy blue gown that felt like silk against her skin. "You look beautiful, Gracie," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." They arrived at the Ryman in the early afternoon for sound checks and final rehearsals. The energy backstage was electric. All 10 finalists were there with their families, coaches, and supporters. Grace could feel the nervous excitement in the air. She ran through both songs with Michael at the piano. Her voice felt strong and clear. The nerves were there, but they felt manageable, even useful. The adrenaline sharpening her focus rather than paralyzing her. Victoria arrived and pulled Grace aside. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous, but ready," Grace said honestly. "Good. I want you to know something before you go on tonight. Regardless of what happens, you've already accomplished more than most artists accomplish in a lifetime. You've found your voice, both literally and figuratively. You've moved people with your music. You've shown incredible courage. I'm honored to work with you, Grace. And this is just the beginning of your journey, not the end." Grace hugged her. "Thank you for everything." The show began at 7 o'clock. The theater was packed with even more people than the semifinals. Victoria mentioned that they'd added standing room to accommodate demand. The panel of judges included Amanda Morrison, 2 other established Nashville artists, a music producer, and a representative from a major label. The format was simple. Each finalist would perform their judge-selected song and their personal choice back to back. The judges would deliberate after all performances and announce the winner at the end of the night. Grace was scheduled to perform 8th out of 10. She sat backstage with her father, listening to the other performances on a monitor. The level of talent was extraordinary. Rebecca Hayes sang a powerful Celine Dion song and an impressive original pop piece. A 16-year-old boy named Daniel Chen performed a stunning classical crossover performance. A girl named Natalie Foster delivered a country ballad that had the audience in tears. Each performance was brilliant. Each performer brought something unique. Grace felt her confidence wavering again. These people were so polished, so professional. What did she have that could compete with that? Then she remembered Michael's words. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to tell stories. Her name was called. David squeezed her hand. "I love you, Gracie. Now go shine." Charles guided her to the stage. The applause washed over her like a wave. She found her mark at the microphone, and the theater fell silent. "I'm Grace Bennett," she said. "I'm going to sing The Story by Brandi Carlile." The music started. Grace closed her eyes. Not that it mattered, but it helped her focus inward, and began to sing. The song was about love and vulnerability, and baring your soul to another person. Grace sang it, thinking about all the people who'd supported her. Her father, who worked himself to exhaustion to give her opportunities. Victoria, who'd invested time and resources with no guarantee of return. Michael, who'd patiently taught her. Her friends who'd stood by her. She sang about the courage it takes to let people see your true self, flaws and fears and all. Her voice navigated the challenging melodic leaps and emotional dynamics with a maturity that belied her 12 years. When she reached the climactic final chorus, she poured everything into it, her voice soaring with power and emotion. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Grace felt tears on her cheeks. She took a breath, composed herself, and said, "And now I'm going to sing my original song, Through the Dark." This time, she sang it differently than in the semifinals. She sang it not as a performance, but as a conversation. as if she were talking directly to everyone who'd ever felt lost, or scared, or alone in the darkness. She sang it for the kids at Music Without Boundaries. She sang it for her younger self, terrified in a hospital bed, learning that she'd never see again. She sang it for her mother's memory. By the final chorus, half the audience was crying. Even some of the judges were wiping their eyes. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted for over a minute. Grace stood at the microphone, overwhelmed, barely able to process what was happening. Backstage, Grace collapsed into her father's arms, emotionally spent. "I did it, Dad. I really did it." "You were perfect," David said. "Absolutely perfect." The final two performers went on. Both were excellent. Then came the interminable wait while the judges deliberated. 45 minutes later, all 10 finalists were called back onto the stage. They stood in a line, holding hands, as Amanda Morrison approached the microphone with an envelope. "First, I want to say that all 10 of you are extraordinarily talented," Amanda began. "Choosing a winner from this group was nearly impossible. You should all be proud of what you've accomplished." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. She held hands with the contestants on either side of her, Rebecca Hayes on her left and Daniel Chen on her right. "The judges have made their decision," Amanda continued. "But before I announce the winner, I want to recognize all of our finalists." She read each name, sharing a comment about their performance. When she got to Grace, she said, "Grace Bennett brought an authenticity and emotional depth that moved every person in this theater. Her original song is one of the most powerful pieces I've heard in years." Finally, Amanda said, "And the winner of Nashville Rising is..." The pause felt like it lasted forever. "Grace Bennett." The theater exploded. Grace heard cheering, screaming, applause. She felt Rebecca squeeze her hand and say, "Congratulations. You deserved it." She felt someone place a bouquet of flowers in her arms. She felt her father's arms around her, felt his tears on her shoulder. "You did it, Gracie," he sobbed. "You did it." Victoria was there, hugging her. Michael was there, his voice choked with emotion, saying, "I knew you could do it." Maya and Tyler and Jennifer from Music Without Boundaries were rushing the stage, everyone hugging and crying and celebrating. The judges wanted photos. The media wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of Grace Bennett, the 12-year-old blind girl who just won Nashville Rising. It should have been the happiest moment of Grace's life, and part of it was. But part of her felt strangely disconnected, as if she were watching it all happen to someone else. What Grace didn't know was that winning the competition would prove to be both a blessing and a complication. The attention that came with it would open doors she'd only dreamed of. But it would also bring challenges that would test everything she'd learned, everything she believed about herself, and the strength of the relationships that had carried her this far. The weeks following Grace's victory were a whirlwind. The prize package from Nashville Rising included a recording contract with Horizon Records, a small but respected independent label, studio time to record a 3-song demo, and mentorship from industry professionals. But the real prize was the attention. The video of Grace's final performance went viral nationally. Major media outlets picked up the story. She was invited to appear on morning talk shows. Music blogs and industry magazines wrote features about her. Her social media following, managed by Victoria's team, grew from a few hundred to over 200,000 in a matter of weeks. "This is unprecedented attention for someone your age," Victoria told Grace and David in a meeting at her office. "We need to be strategic about how we navigate this. Grace is going to get a lot of offers, some good, some not so good. Our job is to protect her while also taking advantage of the right opportunities." The offers came flooding in. A major label wanted to buy out her contract with Horizon Records. A children's book publisher wanted to do a picture book about her life. Several high-profile artists invited her to be a featured guest at their concerts. A national retailer wanted her to be the face of a back-to-school campaign. It was overwhelming. Grace was still 12 years old. She still went to Eastwood Middle School, though now with significantly more attention than before. She still lived in a small apartment with her father. But suddenly, the world saw her as a commodity, a brand, a story to be packaged and sold. David struggled with how to handle it. He wanted Grace to have every opportunity, but he also wanted to preserve her childhood, her normalcy, her mental health. He found himself in meetings with lawyers, publicists, managers, people who spoke a language he didn't understand about contracts and image rights and market demographics. "I'm a mechanic," he confessed to Victoria one evening after a particularly complex contract negotiation. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to protect her from all of this." Victoria looked at him with understanding. "David, you've been protecting Grace her whole life. You know her better than anyone. Trust your instincts, and trust me to handle the business side. That's what I'm here for." Together, they made decisions. They turned down the major label offer, deciding that the smaller, more artist-friendly Horizon Records was a better fit for now. They accepted select media appearances, but said no to anything that felt exploitative or that would require Grace to miss significant school time. They negotiated contracts that included protections for Grace's well-being and education. But even with Victoria's guidance, the pressure was immense. Grace was no longer just a girl who loved to sing. She was Grace Bennett, the blind singer who won Nashville Rising. Everything she did was scrutinized. Every public appearance was analyzed. People she'd never met felt entitled to opinions about her life, her music, her choices. At school, things became more complicated. Some students were genuinely happy for Grace. Others were jealous or resentful. The comments that had bothered her before the competition intensified after her victory. "Must be nice being famous," Ashley Cooper said one day in the hallway. "I'm not famous," Grace replied quietly. "I just won a competition." "Right. That's why there are news vans outside school and people asking for your autograph." Totally normal. Grace wanted to respond, but she didn't know what to say. Ashley was right that things weren't normal, but it wasn't like Grace had asked for all this attention. The situation reached a breaking point in late July. Grace was eating lunch with Maya and Tyler when a group of students approached their table. "So Grace," one of them said, a boy named Jason Turner, "now that you're rich and famous, are you too good to go to school with us regular people?" "I'm not rich or famous," Grace said tiredly. "I'm just me. Come on. You won all that money from the competition. You're probably going to quit school and go on tour or something. I didn't win money. I won a recording contract, and I'm not quitting school." "Whatever," Jason said dismissively. "Just remember us little people when you're a big star." After they walked away, Grace put her head down on the table. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate how everyone treats me differently now." "They're just jealous," Maya said. "I know, but it doesn't make it easier. Sometimes, I wish I'd never entered that stupid competition." Tyler and Maya exchanged worried looks. Grace had never said anything like that before. That night, Grace talked to her father about it. "Dad, is it okay if I just want things to go back to normal?" David pulled her close. "Of course it's okay. But Gracie, you need to understand something. Things can't go back to exactly how they were. You've accomplished something significant, and that comes with changes. But that doesn't mean you have to let it change who you are at your core. You're still Grace. You still love music. You still have the same values and the same heart. Don't let other people's reactions make you forget that. In August, Grace began working on her demo at Horizon Records Studio. The experience was both exciting and intimidating. She'd be recording 3 songs: Through the Dark, a cover of Brave by Sarah Bareilles, and a new original song she'd been working on with Michael called Finding Light. The producer assigned to her project was a woman named Lisa Peterson, a veteran of the Nashville music scene who'd worked on over 50 albums. Lisa was warm but exacting, with high standards and a no-nonsense approach. "You've got a beautiful voice, Grace," Lisa told her on the first day. "But recording is different from performing live. We're going to do multiple takes of everything. We're going to perfect every phrase. It's tedious, but it's how we create something that will hold up to repeated listening." Grace quickly learned that recording was indeed tedious. She'd sing the same verse 20 times, making tiny adjustments each time. Lisa would have her try different emotional approaches, different phrasing, different breathing patterns. They'd work on a single song for hours until every note was exactly right. It was exhausting, but Grace also found it fascinating. She was learning so much about her voice, about music production, about the craft of making a recording. Michael sat in on most sessions, providing support and occasionally weighing in on artistic choices. During a break one afternoon, Lisa asked Grace about her musical influences. Grace talked about Reba McEntire, of course, but also mentioned other artists she'd discovered through Michael and Victoria: Patty Griffin, Alison Krauss, Emmylou Harris, women with powerful voices who told meaningful stories through their music. "You have good taste," Lisa said. "Those are all artists who've maintained long careers because they stayed true to their artistry. That's what you need to aim for, Grace. Not just hits or fame, but a sustainable career built on authentic music." The demo took 6 weeks to complete. When Lisa played the final mixes for Grace, David, and Victoria, Grace was stunned. That was her voice, but somehow it sounded fuller, richer, more professional than she'd ever imagined. "This is incredible," Victoria said, a rare note of excitement in her usually controlled voice. "Grace, this demo is good enough to shop to major labels. These songs could be on the radio." But before they could move forward with the demo, an unexpected opportunity arose. Reba McEntire's team reached out to Victoria. Reba remembered Grace from the benefit concert and had followed her Nashville Rising journey. She was planning a small acoustic tour of theaters across the South in October, and she wanted Grace to be her opening act for the Nashville show. Grace would perform 3 or 4 songs for about 20 minutes, Victoria explained to Grace and David. It would be at the Ryman again, so familiar territory. "This is enormous, Grace. Reba doesn't invite just anyone to open for her." Grace felt a mix of excitement and terror. Opening for Reba McEntire, her idol, the person whose music had connected her to her mother, felt like a dream. But it also felt like immense pressure. "What if I'm not good enough?" Grace asked. "Reba believes you are, or she wouldn't have invited you," Victoria said firmly. "And I believe you are. Michael believes you are. The question is, do you believe you are?" Grace thought about everything she'd been through: the training, the competition, the recording sessions, all the moments of doubt and fear that she'd pushed through. "Yes," she said finally, "I believe I can do this." The next 2 months were devoted to preparing for the Reba concert. Grace worked with Michael on crafting the perfect 20-minute set. They decided on 4 songs: Through the Dark, Brave, a cover of Reba's Consider Me Gone, and Finding Light. Grace also had to balance this preparation with starting 8th grade at Eastwood. Victoria had insisted that school remain a priority, so rehearsals and recording sessions were scheduled around Grace's classes and homework. The attention at school had died down somewhat as the novelty of Grace's fame wore off. She'd settled into a routine with a small group of friends, Maya, Tyler, and a few others who treated her like a normal person. Ashley Cooper and her group still made occasional comments. But Grace had learned to let it roll off her. What Grace hadn't anticipated was how lonely success could be. Her friends were supportive, but they couldn't fully understand what she was going through. The pressure, the scrutiny, the constant balancing act between being a normal 13-year-old, she'd had her birthday in September, and being Grace Bennett the singer. There were nights when she lay in bed feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people who loved her. The darkness that had always been her physical reality sometimes felt like an emotional reality too. A sense of being lost in a world that didn't quite make sense. She wrote about these feelings in her journal, and eventually they became the seeds of new songs. Music remained her way of processing the world, of making sense of her experiences. The night of the Reba McEntire concert arrived in mid-October. Grace had performed at the Ryman before, but this felt different. This wasn't a competition or a charity event. This was a professional concert with a sold-out audience who'd paid to see Reba McEntire. They'd be polite to the opening act, but they hadn't come for Grace. Backstage, Grace was more nervous than she'd been for the Nashville Rising finals. Her hands shook as she went through vocal warm-ups. David stayed close, offering quiet encouragement. "You've got this, Gracie. Just like we practiced." Victoria arrived with unexpected news. "Grace, Reba would like to meet with you before the show." Grace's heart leapt. She'd sung with Reba once, briefly, at the benefit concert, but she hadn't had a real conversation with her. Now, her idol wanted to talk. Victoria led Grace to Reba's dressing room. The country star greeted her warmly. "Grace Bennett. Look at you, all grown up since I last saw you," Reba said, pulling Grace into a hug. "I'm only 13, Grace said shyly. "I haven't grown up that much." Reba laughed. "Well, your career sure has. I've been following your journey, honey. That Nashville Rising performance was something special. You've got a real gift." "Thank you, Ms. McEntire. You've been my inspiration since I was little. My mom loved your music. Victoria told me about your mom. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I can hear her influence in your singing. That emotional honesty doesn't come from nowhere." They talked for several minutes. Reba shared stories from her own early career, the struggles and doubts she'd faced, the lessons she'd learned. She told Grace, "The most important thing is to stay true to yourself. The industry will try to mold you, to make you fit into whatever's selling at the moment. But the artists who last are the ones who know who they are and don't compromise that." "Did you ever get scared?" Grace asked. "Even after you were successful?" "Every single time I step on stage," Reba admitted. "That never goes away. But I learned that the fear means you care. The day you stop being nervous is the day it stops mattering. So you take that fear and you channel it into your performance. You use it." When it was time for the show to start, Grace felt calmer. Reba McEntire, one of the biggest stars in country music, still got nervous. If she could channel that fear into something productive, so could Grace. The stage lights came up. The audience noise faded. Grace walked onto the stage of the Ryman Auditorium with her cane, found her mark at the microphone, and began. "Good evening, Nashville. My name is Grace Bennett, and I'm honored to be here tonight opening for the legendary Reba McEntire." The applause was warm but reserved, people being polite to the opening act. "I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm here," Grace continued. "My mother passed away when I was 8 years old. In the accident, I lost my vision. For a long time, I felt lost in the darkness. But my mom had loved music, especially Reba McEntire's music, and singing became my way of finding my way back to her. and back to myself. This first song is about that journey. She launched into Through the Dark. By the time she reached the chorus, the audience was fully engaged. By the time she finished, they were on their feet. Grace performed all 4 songs with confidence and emotional authenticity. When she sang Consider Me Gone, Reba's own song, she could feel the audience appreciating the tribute. When she finished with Finding Light, her newest original song about hope and perseverance, the standing ovation lasted for over a minute. "Thank you so much," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "Enjoy Reba McEntire." She exited the stage to thunderous applause. Backstage, her father wrapped her in a huge hug. Victoria was beaming. "That was extraordinary, Grace. You completely won that audience over." But the biggest surprise came after Reba's performance. As the encore ended, Reba called out, "I've got a very special guest here tonight. Grace Bennett, would you come back out here?" Grace was guided back onto the stage, her heart pounding. Reba put an arm around her shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I can tell when someone has that special something. This young lady right here has it. Grace, would you do me the honor of singing one more song with me?" They sang Fancy together, just like they had at the benefit concert a year ago. But this time, Grace wasn't a nervous kid getting a lucky break. She was a professional artist, holding her own beside a legend. Their voices blended beautifully, and when they finished, the Ryman Auditorium erupted in the loudest applause Grace had ever heard. Afterward, Reba hugged Grace tight. "You're going to have an amazing career, sweetheart. Don't let anybody dim your light." The performance was a turning point. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Music industry executives who'd been watching Grace from a distance started taking her seriously as an artist, not just a feel-good story. The demo that Lisa had produced started getting real traction. In November, Victoria came to Grace and David with an opportunity that would require a difficult decision. A major label, Summit Records, wanted to sign Grace. They were offering a substantial advance, a multi-album deal, and significant promotional support. It was the kind of offer that most artists never received. But there were strings attached. Summit wanted Grace to record more commercial pop country material, to work with their team of producers and songwriters, and to commit to a touring schedule that would require missing significant school time or switching to online schooling. "This is a life-changing opportunity," Victoria said carefully. "The advance alone would secure your financial future, David. Grace would have resources and promotion that could make her a household name. But it would also mean giving up a significant amount of creative control and fundamentally changing how you're living your lives." David looked at his daughter. "What do you think, Gracie?" Grace was quiet for a long time. A year ago, she would have jumped at this opportunity without hesitation. But now, having experienced the pressure and scrutiny that came with success, she wasn't sure. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," Victoria said. "Take your time." Over the next week, Grace wrestled with the decision. She talked to Michael, who cautioned her about giving up creative control too early in her career. She talked to her father, who promised to support whatever she decided. She talked to Reba McEntire on the phone. Reba had given Grace her number and told her to call if she ever needed advice. "Only you can make this decision," Reba told her. "But I can tell you from experience that the choices you make early in your career set the trajectory for everything that comes after. Money and fame are nice, but they don't mean much if you lose yourself in the process." Grace also thought about what brought her joy. It wasn't performing in front of huge crowds or seeing her face in magazines. It was the moment when she connected with a song, when she told a story that resonated with people, when music helped her and others make sense of the world. Finally, she made her decision. "I want to stay with Horizon Records," she told Victoria and her father. "I know Summit is offering more money and more exposure, but Horizon lets me be part of the creative process. They let me write my own songs and have a say in how they're produced. I don't want to be a product. I want to be an artist." David felt relief flood through him. He'd been terrified that Grace would choose the Summit offer, and he'd have to watch his 13-year-old daughter get swept up in a machine that prioritized profits over people. Victoria smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I think you're making the wise choice, Grace. You're thinking long-term, and that's rare for someone your age." They negotiated a new deal with Horizon that gave Grace better terms while preserving her creative control. She'd record her first full album over the next year, to be released when she was 14. She'd do limited touring, small venues, primarily on weekends and during school breaks. She'd continue her education, continue working with Michael, continue living in Nashville with her father. It wasn't the most glamorous path, and it certainly wasn't the quickest route to massive success, but it felt right. As the year drew to a close, Grace reflected on how much had changed in 12 months. She'd gone from a nervous kid singing at a benefit concert to a recording artist with a growing fan base and a real career ahead of her. She'd faced challenges she never could have imagined and discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. But she'd also learned something crucial. Success wasn't about winning competitions or signing record deals or becoming famous. Success was about staying true to herself, maintaining the relationships that mattered, and continuing to do the things she loved for the right reasons. On Christmas Eve, Grace sat with her father in their small apartment. They'd put up a modest tree, and Christmas music played softly in the background. Reba McEntire's holiday album, of course. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Grace said. "Anything, kiddo. Are you happy with how everything has turned out?" David was quiet for a moment. "You know what makes me happy, Gracie? Watching you pursue something you love. Seeing you challenge yourself and grow. The fact that you're successful is nice, but it's not why I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you because you're kind and hardworking and brave. Because you face a world that's harder for you than it is for most people, and you do it with grace. No pun intended. So yes, I'm happy. Not because you won a competition or signed a record deal, but because you're still you." Grace hugged her father tight. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, Gracie." Later that night, Grace stood at her bedroom window. She couldn't see the stars, but she knew they were there. Just like she couldn't see her future, but she knew it held possibility. She thought about her mother, hoping Linda was proud of her. She thought about Victoria and Michael and Reba and everyone who'd believed in her and invested in her success. She thought about the kids at Music Without Boundaries who saw her as proof that their disabilities didn't have to limit their dreams. Grace Bennett had learned that the journey from darkness to light wasn't a straight path. It was winding and uncertain, filled with challenges and setbacks. But it was also filled with moments of beauty and connection and joy. She picked up her guitar, she'd been learning to play with Michael's help, and began working on a new song. The melody came easily, flowing from her fingers. The lyrics were about journeys and dreams, about finding your way even when you can't see the path, about trusting that the light exists even in the darkness. As she sang quietly, Grace Bennett, 13 years old, blind, and full of possibility, knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because she'd achieved some external measure of success, but because she'd discovered her voice, her truth, and her purpose. And in a world that often felt dark and uncertain, that was its own kind of light. The end came not with a dramatic finale, but with a quiet confidence in the journey ahead. Grace had learned the most important lesson of all. Success isn't a destination you reach, but a path you walk with courage, authenticity, and love. Her story, the story of a girl who found her voice through the darkness, was only just beginning.